That evening, her shift in the Joint Command Conference had run longer than scheduled. Human officers had a peculiar habit of debating tactical theories long after decisions had already been made, as though repetition somehow sharpened the truth. When the meeting finally dispersed, Caretha's mind was clouded with fatigue, and she longed only for the stillness of her assigned quarters. Unfortunately, she took the wrong corridor. At first, she didn't realize her mistake. The Resolute's decks repeated themselves with near-identical bulkheads and lighting strips. But soon she noticed she had passed the same maintenance junction twice. She retraced her steps, only to encounter a sealed bulkhead that hadn't been closed before. An internal systems notice on the small screen beside it read, "Pressure check, section closed." She took another turn, trying to orient herself using her memory of the ship's schematics. The Xenari favored curved, flowing architecture. Human vessels were rigid and symmetrical, which made every hallway feel like a mirror of the last. It was only after passing through a deserted mess hall that she began to suspect she had wandered into the flight officers' wing. Her suspicions were confirmed when she stopped in front of a door labeled in Terran script, LT, Commander E. Rourke. Flight Ops. She knew of him, Ethan Rourke, one of the Resolute's senior pilots, rumored to have logged more atmospheric reentry hours than anyone else aboard. She had seen him in passing during fleet briefings, tall for a human, with dark hair that refused perfect regulation and eyes the pale gray of frozen seas. He had the easy confidence of someone accustomed to both command and danger. She should have turned away immediately. It was improper to intrude into an officer's personal quarters without invitation. But an inexplicable impulse made her lift a hand and press the chime. The door slid open with a soft hiss. She expected darkness and an empty room. Instead, she found herself staring into a small, dimly lit cabin. The scent of the air inside struck her first, a warm mix of ozone, worn leather, and something richer, more organic. She searched her memory of cultural briefings. Coffee, she recalled. Humans consumed it both for flavor and stimulation, despite its mild toxicity to other species. The room itself was modest, a narrow bed against one wall, a desk cluttered with datapads and mechanical parts, and shelves lined with small framed images. They caught her eye immediately. Vivid greens, endless blues, towering peaks, sprawling forests. She recognized the planet instantly from countless Hala's Earth. Then she noticed movement. At the desk sat Rourke himself, leaning forward in a loose gray shirt and dark trousers, his hands working on a strange device she didn't recognize, a curved metal grip with buttons and a central pivot. He glanced up at her entrance. His expression was not annoyance, nor the tight politeness of most humans when addressing Xenari officers. Instead, it was a quiet curiosity, as if he were more surprised by her hesitation than her presence. "Lost?" he asked. His voice was low, roughened by recycled air and long hours on cum channels. Caretha's first instinct was to retreat. "Yes," she admitted, her tone clipped. "My apologies. Human, I will." She stepped back toward the corridor, but she didn't leave. She told herself it was only for a moment, just long enough to process the unexpected warmth of the room, so different from the sterile chill of her own quarters. Yet there was more to it than that. It was the way he looked at her, not through her, not as a representative of her species, but as if he were seeing her. The hum of the corridor behind her seemed distant now. Inside, the air carried a strange calm. Her own quarters were clean and efficient, but devoid of life. This place felt lived in, and so she stood there, just inside the hatch, caught between the protocol that told her to leave and the quiet, inexplicable pull urging her to remain. She didn't seem flustered exactly, but she carried herself with a guarded formality. Her large, crystalline eyes scanned the cabin like she was trying to decipher its purpose. He guessed she was looking for the exit, even as she remained rooted. In place. He set down the half-disassembled flight stick and leaned back in his chair. Training stick, he said, nodding toward the object. Old model, I've been fixing it up. Her gaze shifted to him. You use outdated equipment. For training? The question wasn't mocking. It was genuine curiosity. Sometimes the old stuff teaches you more, he replied. New systems can do half the work for you. I like to remind myself what it's like without the safety nets. He gestured to the only other chair in the room, a simple metal seat tucked near the desk. You can sit, if you want, Kareth hesitated. Among the Zainari, entering another's private space without formal invitation was a rare honor. For her to remain here already broke small cultural boundaries. Yet something about his tone, it wasn't an order, nor a command masked as politeness. It was simply an offer. She sat down at first. Their words were functional, bordering on stiff. She explained she had taken a wrong turn after leaving the command deck. He asked what her assigned duties were aboard the Resolute. She told him she acted as an intermediary between the Terran fleet and the Zanari High Council, translating not just language but cultural nuance. He nodded at that. Diplomatic work, tough job. I prefer things where you either land the ship in one piece or you don't know shades of gray. She tilted her head slightly, studying him. Humans seem to enjoy framing challenges as binary outcomes. Maybe, he admitted with a faint smile, makes them easier to face. It could have ended there. She could have risen, thanked him for the seat, and left. But her gaze drifted again to the walls, to the small framed photographs scattered between flight commendations and mission patches. That is your world, she said, pointing to one with rolling green hills under a brilliant blue sky. Yeah. That's Earth. Ireland, specifically, he replied. His voice softened, losing the clipped precision of a military report. That's where my family's from. Haven't been back in a long time. She leaned forward slightly, her curiosity overcoming her reserve. These formations in the image? They are not structures, yet they stand as walls. Stone fences, he explained. Farmers built them centuries ago to mark land boundaries. Still standing today. He glanced toward another frame. That one's Alaska flew there during my atmospheric pilot days. Ice as far as you can see, but the air's so clear you can spot a bird from kilometers away. The more he spoke, the more she realized he wasn't reciting facts from a briefing. He was telling stories, memories, not data points. He described the sound of the wind over mountain ridges, the salt tang of the ocean spray, the crackle of campfires under a night sky so full of stars it almost rivaled the void outside their current ship. Without meaning to, Kareth found herself speaking in turn. She told him of her homeworld's glass forests, where the wind produced music as it swept through crystalline branches, of the vast migration of sky beasts whose wings shimmered like liquid silver in the sunlight, of the first time she left her home atmosphere, staring at her world from orbit and realizing how small it truly was. For a time, the cramped cabin ceased to be a room on a warship. It became a space between worlds, where human and Zinari could trade visions of beauty without the filter of duty or diplomacy. It wasn't until she happened to glance at the chrono on his desk that she realized hours had passed. What she thought had been a fleeting pause in her evening had stretched into nearly 3 standard hours. The sudden awareness made her sit straighter, the old instinct to retreat returning. I have kept you from your work, she said, rising. You don't have to go, Rourke replied, his tone casual but carrying a quiet weight. He didn't plead. He simply offered. Kareth hesitated. By all logic, she should leave, return to her own quarters, re-establish the professional distance their positions required. But something in the cabin, the smell of the coffee, the warmth of the lighting, the fact that he had listened without judgment made her pause. She told herself she was simply passing through that section of the ship after her shift, that the Resolute's maze-like corridors made it inevitable. Yet even she knew this was self-deception. The human pilot's cabin had become a waypoint on her internal map, not because of convenience, but because of what she found inside. Rourke never seemed surprised when she appeared. Sometimes he was working on his old flight stick, the casing open to expose wires and gears. Other times he was bent over navigation charts, sketching flight paths with a precision stylus. Once, she caught him leaning back with his boots propped on the desk, sipping coffee and staring at nothing in particular, as though letting the weight of the day drain away. The conversations between them evolved naturally. At first, they stayed on neutral topic ship operations, the latest fleet news, the occasional absurdity from the interspecies diplomatic corps. She told him about the Zenari envoy's meticulous rituals before entering the council chamber. He countered with tales of human pilots improvising entire speeches when they'd forgotten their prepared remarks. They shared quiet amusement, trading small smiles more than laughter, but over time their talks deepened. Rourke began asking about her home in ways no one else aboard had. Most humans were curious in the broad strokes: culture, climate, technology. He wanted details. What did the air smell like after a glass forest rain? How did the sound of the wind change with the seasons? Did the great migration of sky beasts bring a shift in the colors of the horizon? She answered, at first cautiously, then with growing ease. She told him how the glass trees caught sunlight and refracted it into thousands of shifting rainbows. How the wing beats of the migrating sky beasts were so massive they stirred the upper winds into visible ripples. How she had been only 8 cycles old when she decided she would see other worlds, even if it meant leaving the beauty of her own behind. In return, he offered her pieces of Earth she'd never heard from an official data archive. He spoke of ocean storms that rattled the bones, of summer evenings when the air was thick with the smell of cut grass and salt water, of flying low enough over forests to see deer scatter below. He described landing a shuttle on the red dust plains of Mars during his early career, the first time he realized space could make a man feel both infinite and insignificant in the same breath. The cabin itself became a kind of sanctuary. Steady background hum of the ship seemed softer there, the harsh lighting of the corridors replaced by a warmer glow from the desk lamp. It smelled of coffee and engine oil, and faintly comfortingly of leather from the worn flight harness draped over the chair. Her own quarters were sterile and efficient. A bed, a desk, a storage unit, all spotless and silent. They had no personality, no trace of the life she lived. In Rourke's room, everything carried the weight of use. Even the clutter was deliberate, telling a story she was slowly learning to read. She began to notice things without meaning to. The way he rubbed his right shoulder absently, a pilot's habit born from hours in the cockpit. The faint, near inaudible hum he made when concentrating. How he never pushed conversation, but always left space for her to speak, filling the silences. Not with words, but with presence, and she began to notice something else herself. She realized she stayed longer each time, that she lingered after the conversation had slowed. That leaving felt unnecessary. In the privacy of her own quarters, Kareth tried to analyze this strange pull. Zenari were not a particularly emotional species by human standards, yet she felt an uncharacteristic draw toward that cabin. It wasn't romantic, at least not yet, and it wasn't merely friendship. It was something deeper, harder to define. A kind of resonance, as if 2 entirely different worlds had found a shared frequency. She didn't speak of it to anyone. The diplomatic corps would read too much into it. Her own people might see it as a compromise of professional boundaries. But the truth was simple. The human pilot's room had become the only place on the Resolute where she felt completely unguarded. By the end of the 3rd week, Kareth stopped pretending her visits were accidents. She still approached his door with the same measured pace, still pressed the chime like she might be turned away, but she knew what she was hoping for. Kareth had been reviewing a particularly dense packet of diplomatic transmissions in one of the auxiliary briefing rooms when the sharp, oscillating wail cut through the ship. The overhead lights flashed red in steady pulses, casting long shadows that seemed to lurch with each blink. The vibration of the hull shifted subtly beneath her feet, a telltale sign of bulkhead seals sliding into place. Attention, ship-wide systems drill. All personnel to assigned safety zones. The ship's automated voice was calm, almost indifferent, as though announcing a meal rotation instead of a possible crisis. Kareth's first reaction should have been to proceed to her designated muster point. Every crew member, Terran or Xenari, had memorized the nearest safe zone locations and the most direct routes. Her own quarters were relatively close to one. Yet the moment the first blare of the alarm reached her ears, her body moved in a different direction entirely. Before her mind had fully processed it, her steps had already turned toward the flight operations deck. It was illogical. There was no tactical advantage to going there. No part of the safety protocols required her presence near the pilot's quarters. Yet each intersection she passed, each sealed bulkhead she detoured around, only reinforced the certainty of her destination. When she reached the familiar hatch labeled LT, Commander Erourke Flight Ops, the red emergency lights made the letters glow ominously. She pressed the chime. The door slid open almost instantly. Rourke was already halfway into his flight harness, the broad straps crossing over his chest, the metal clasps gleaming under the emergency lights. His hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd been roused from a rare moment of rest. For a second, neither spoke. The alarm pulsed through the corridor, but inside his cabin, the sound felt less sharp, less urgent, as though the air itself was heavier and quieter here. Then, without a word, he reached out and took her by the wrist, not roughly, but firmly, enough to guide her inside. The hatch sealed behind them with a muffled thud. "You're supposed to be in a safe zone," he said, moving toward the console on the far wall. His tone wasn't accusing, merely factual. "I was redirected," she replied, though even she heard the thinness of the excuse. He tapped at the console, eyes scanning the data feed. "Nothing serious," he concluded after a moment. "Just a systems drill, testing the seal integrity in the aft sections." The klaxons continued, but his calm was infectious. Her pulse slowed, the tightness in her chest easing. She realized she was still standing near the hatch, the faint heat of his earlier grip lingering on her skin. "I should return to my quarters," she said out of habit, but the words lacked conviction. "You could," he said without turning from the console. Then he looked over his shoulder, one eyebrow slightly raised. "Or you could wait it out." Here, it wasn't an invitation in the formal sense. It was more like a natural extension of the unspoken understanding that had been growing between them for weeks. Kareth found herself stepping further into the room. The warmth was the same as always, the faint scent of coffee, the cluttered desk, the steady hum of systems behind the walls. Yet tonight, with the alarm still echoing through the ship, it felt different. More like a shield. Rourke resumed fastening the last strap of his harness, then unfastened it again with a shrug. "Guess I won't be flying tonight," he said. With a faint smirk, she tilted her head, a small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth despite herself. "Your drills seem unnecessarily dramatic." "That's the point," he replied. "If they feel real, we react like it's real. Better to be ready than caught off guard." The alarms eventually stopped, replaced by the steady white lighting of normal operations. But neither of them moved to end the moment. Kareth realized that during the entire drill, Her thoughts hadn't gone to safety procedures, evacuation paths, or even her own well-being. Her first and only instinct had been to get to him. A week after the systems drill, Kareth found herself once again standing outside Rourke's quarters. This time, there was no excuse. No wrong turn through unfamiliar corridors, no bulkhead seals forcing a detour, no pretense of delivering a message from the diplomatic corps. She was here because she wanted to be. The door panel glowed faintly under her hand as she pressed the chime. For a heartbeat, she wondered if he would be there or if, for once, the cabin might be empty, and she'd be left alone with her own hesitation. The hatch slid open almost instantly. Rourke was at his desk, hunched slightly forward, the old training. Stick laid open in front of him like an injured bird he was mending. His hands moved with the practiced ease of someone who had rebuilt the same thing more times than he could count. A soft lamp lit the desk, casting warm shadows that made the small cabin feel even smaller and, somehow, more sheltered. He didn't look up immediately. "Evening," he said, the single word carrying no surprise at her presence. "You leaving?" The question caught her off guard. It wasn't framed as "Are you staying?" but as if the possibility of departure was the unusual part. She took a step inside. "I came." Without reason, she admitted, the Zenari equivalent of a confession. He leaned back in his chair and gave her that steady, level gaze she'd grown familiar with. "You don't need one." The door slid shut behind her with a soft hiss, and Kareth felt, as she often did, the faint shift in atmosphere like stepping into a pocket of calmer air within a storm. She glanced around, noting the small changes since her last visit. A new photo on the wall, this one of a streak of light cutting through a night sky, what he had once called a meteor shower. The coffee mug on the desk was half full, still steaming. Her own quarters flashed briefly in her mind. The sterile white walls, the perfectly organized storage unit, the bed with military precision corners, functional, lifeless. "You ever get tired of this ship?" she asked suddenly. He smiled faintly. "Sometimes. But you don't fly for the comfort of the walls. You fly for where they take you." She considered that, then moved toward the small bench against the wall and sat. The conversation didn't rush to fill the space. That was another thing about Rourke. He didn't treat silence like an enemy to be conquered. He let it settle until it became part of the room. After a long pause, she said, "When the drill began last week, I did not go to my assigned muster point." "I noticed," he said, his tone unreadable. "I came here," she continued, without thought, without reason. It concerned me afterward." He nodded once. "Sometimes instincts are just telling you what your brain hasn't caught up to yet." Kareth studied him for a moment, the set of his jaw, the way his eyes held hers without challenge. She realized then that the pull she felt toward this room toward him wasn't something that needed to be dissected like a tactical report. It was enough that it existed. She stood slowly, crossing the narrow space between them. "I think I'll stay," she said softly. There was no dramatic flourish, no sudden surge of music in the background, just the quiet acceptance of a choice already made days, maybe weeks ago. Rourke didn't say welcome, didn't ask for how long. He simply shifted his chair slightly, leaving space beside the desk for her to stand, and went back to adjusting the flight stick. She found herself watching the steady movement of his hands, the faint scent of coffee rising between them, the warmth of the lamp's light. Outside, the Resolute continued its endless journey through the void. Somewhere, other crew members walked sterile halls, attended briefings, followed protocols. But in this small cabin, time felt different, slower, heavier, more deliberate. For the first time since she'd stepped aboard the human warship, Kareth felt no urge to retreat to her own quarters, no need to plan her departure. Whatever this was between them, it didn't need a label yet. It was enough that the hatch was closed, the world outside muted, and she was exactly where she wanted to be. And she knew, without question, she would return tomorrow. Not by accident, not by mistake, but because she had chosen to,